Some legends hide in the shadows of forest. Others lurk under bridges or in corners of campfire stories. And then there's the ones that slip into the daylight, standing right in front of you, and it might just be on your street corner. This is the story of one of Denton's strangest figures, part mystery, part myth, and all mask, the Pricemaster. If you joined me last time, we investigated the Goatman and Old Alton Bridge, a creature stitched together from fear, folklore, and Denton County's tangled history. But tonight, the shadows are a little closer to home. No bridge, no horns, no hooves. Instead, garage sales, yard signs, and bow-legged figures. What does he want? Where did he come from? And why do so many people who've seen him walk away with more questions than others? So there's a lot of uncertainty that follows the Pricemaster. A lot of people question whether this was just a hobby for someone or if it was a performative act, perhaps like guerrilla theater, or even if it was a mythical figure that wove its way into Denton folklore. The truth is nobody really knows, and that's what makes this story worth investigating. A lot of people in Denton have had encounters with the Pricemaster in the early 2000s. He would appear as a garage salesman, just in random neighborhoods really, and he was masked, so nobody could really tell who he was. He responded with crazy counter offers. He never really went low on anything. I think the lowest price that he said was about $14.75. But he had prices up to $14 billion. And he never explained himself in any of this. He would yell the prices out at people and really just not waver on any of them. There's a certain theatrical quality to the Pricemaster. He appears unexpectedly and then disappears without explanation. The neighborhood the house gets cleaned up, no more tables, no nothing. He leaves people with lots of questions of whether it's a prank or a lesson or just somebody trying to cause chaos in Denton. It almost has a scripted quality to it, really. It's like he planned what he was going to say before, but there's no way he could have known what people were going to say about the items that he was selling or offers that people were going to make. He really just left everybody confused. I mean, there's people there who look shocked, who look upset, people who laugh it off, really. He got a lot of mixed reactions from what I can tell. Now we get into some common questions that people have about the Pricemaster. Like, who was he? Was he a local eccentric, a UNT student, early internet legend? There are official records of who played the Pricemaster, but we don't really know why he chose in the beginning to stay anonymous. Was it just to keep the myth alive? Was it for laughs? And then we get into the question of why he did it. Some people believe that it was an experiment in human behaviors, testing reaction to the values of the products he was offering at his garage sale. Could have been a statement on consumerism in America, or the most likely reason was just pure amusement. I mean, this guy got a lot of reactions, as I said before. And I think from that, prank grew this legend of the Pricemaster. And then we get into why it matters today. The legend shows how stories evolve in community. People still talk about the Pricemaster in 2025, and this happened in the early 2000s. That's 20 years afterwards. It also reflects our fascination with unusual and unexplainable behaviors in people. People still question why this weird guy was standing up here in a mask and selling all these things. And it introduces the idea of consumer culture in America and internet myths and memes. This is something that's really recent. This happened in the early 2000s, so it's happened in the last 20 years, and it's been documented online better than really any sort of myth in Denton. And this event is grounded in contemporary culture, not just century-old folklore that's been passed down generation to generation. Over these next chapters, we'll break down the theories, explore his connection to culture, and even step into the field to see what a Pricemaster encounter might really feel like. One theory about the Pricemaster is that he wasn't a mysterious merchant at all, but rather a performer staging a piece of guerrilla theater. At the beginning of the video, there's a quote from Marshall McLuhan from "The medium is the message." Environments are not passive wrappings, but are rather active processes which are invisible. The ground rules, pervasive structure, and overall patterns of environments elude easy perception. Anti-environments or counter situations made by artists provide means of direct attention and enable us to see and understand more clearly. Humor as a system of communications and as a probe of our environment, of what's really going on, affords us our most appealing anti-environmental tool. It does not deal in theory, but in immediate experience, and is often the best guide in changing perceptions. His appearance, mask, robe, and the fact that he deliberately conceals his identity mirrors the aesthetics of performance art, where the stage is everyday life and the audience often doesn't realize that they're watching a show. Instead of selling items in good faith, the Pricemaster might have been performing a social experiment, using ridiculous counteroffers as his script and treating the garage sale as his stage. This interpretation places him less in the category of a scammer or eccentric and more as a living art installation aimed at making people question what value really means. The idea of the Pricemaster as a performance artist isn't just speculation, it's how many people online interpret him when the video resurfaced. On r/videos where the YouTube link was shared, users described the garage sale exchange as absurdist and straight out of experimental theater. One commenter laughed about the moment when he demanded $17.95 for a random item, saying, "Love the first guy's reaction to his $17.95 counteroffer. It feels scripted." The tone of the thread suggests the viewers saw more of a skit than a genuine sales negotiation.
Do these work? What do they do?
Elsewhere in a discussion on r/Texas, locals remember spotting the phrase "the Pricemaster" painted on a wall in Denton and debated whether he was some kind of folk icon or an art project that escaped its intended audience. One user even asked outright, "Was this performance art? I don't get it." These online reactions show how people instinctively frame him not as a scammer or crank, but as a character, a mass persona playing with social expectations. So there's a few reasons why this theory can hold up. His mask and robes amplify a sense of theatrical performance. He wasn't hiding out of fear, he was hiding as a performance. The outrageous counteroffers, like demanding bizarre trades or even accepting checks, felt less like a negotiation of sorts and more like a carefully crafted absurdist theater. Another reason is garage sales draw in a wide range of unexpected participants. The randomness gave him a stage to perform on, forcing everyday people into roles in his show, and they were just coming in as unprepared actors. He gave them no warning. They were just people from the street. And performance art often critiques society. In this case, the Pricemaster could have been poking at how we attach worth to cheap objects, testing whether people would laugh, get angry, or play along with his act. Now, there's a few holes in this theory. Performance artists often document their work, or they'll reappear in other places. The Pricemaster seems to just have vanished. He left no record other than this 30-minute video that we have. Unlike street performers who attract spectators, the Pricemaster had no guaranteed audience. He told nobody that he was going to be here. He just popped up and just had to hope that people would see him and walk over. It's possible only a few people saw him, which weakens the performance argument. There weren't many people in the video who came up. I mean, there were a few groups, but it just seemed like students. And lastly, performance art usually leaves some sort of trace, a manifesto of some kind, a gallery write-up even. Without one, it's just as plausible that he was simply eccentric rather than making a deliberate artist point. Without that kind of artist statement, it can lead people to believe that he was just doing this to do it. There was no performance behind it. There was no rhyme or reason. It was just him. Another theory is that the Pricemaster wasn't just performing for laughs, but deliberately running a social experiment. His strange counteroffers and refusal to assign conventional prices to items may have been designed to test how people respond when their sense of value is challenged. Rather than opening as a traditional seller, he acted more like a behavioral scientist who wanted to observe what happened when everyday transactions are stripped of their usual logic. Was he exposing how much people cling to material possessions, or was he mocking the way consumer culture teaches us to assign worth where there may be none at all? The way people reacted to the Pricemaster online echoes a long-running frustration about garage sale pricings. In a popular r/flipping thread titled "Overpriced, Rude, or Crazy Estate/Yard Sale/Garage Sale Stories," one user described a woman who consistently marked donated items at outrageous prices, even chewing people out for selling too cheap. Others shared similar encounters walking out of sales where a used PlayStation was priced at $300, or where bins of common video games were offered at triple their value just because an old sticker claimed they were worth more. Another user in the same thread noted that garage sales run by self-proclaimed collectors often came with eBay-level markups. One comment joked about sellers advertising Funko Star Wars toys and vintage games as if they were luxury collectibles, with prices pulled directly from online listings. In one practically absurd story, a seller actually pulled out their phone mid-sale to check eBay and then refused to name a price, asking the buyer to leave their number so he could call later. Unsurprisingly, everyone walked away empty-handed. Other stories touched on sellers printing out full eBay listings and taping them next to random household items. One person even recalled seeing a $15 Scotch Brite sponge justified this way. Comments in these threads reveal a common theme. Buyers often felt manipulated, confused, or outright mocked by the disconnect between the accepted low-stakes bargain hunt of a garage sale and the inflated value system sellers imposed. That tension is exactly what makes the Pricemaster feel like more than just an eccentric seller. His overblown counteroffers and refusal to pay by normal pricing rules mirrors the same discomfort Reddit users describe when confronted with absurd garage sale markups. Whether he intended it or not, his antics highlighted the fragile trust at the core of consumer transactions, how easily people get thrown off when value no longer makes sense. Again, there are a few ways that this theory holds up. By refusing to play by the rules of money and haggling, the Pricemaster highlights how obsessed we are with attaching value to otherwise worthless objects. Most of the things the Pricemaster had out on the table weren't things that people would need. I mean, there were a couple statues, even a mini CRT TV, a bronze cross. And other items he would even just assign weird titles to, like watches. He called them the communicators. His behavioral forced the participants to reveal their frustrations, confusion, or amusement. Perfect data points for someone studying human reactions. There were plenty of people who were upset about his offers and were just saying, oh, I'm just going to take this stuff if you're not going to be reasonable. The 2000s and 2010s were full of movements critiquing mass consumptions, minimalism, anti-advertising, buy nothing groups. The Pricemaster fits great into that cultural movement. He wouldn't let people leave if they didn't agree to pay his price. And I mean, that really mirrors shops in the real world. I mean, if you don't pay the price that they have set, then you can't get your items. There's no bargaining with the Pricemaster, whereas at a normal garage sale, you could probably talk someone down, but with the Pricemaster, there was no talking to this guy. The people who encountered him didn't forget him. The lasting impression suggests that he succeeded in sparking reflection, whether intentionally or not. We still talk about the Pricemaster and how absolutely insane this guy was for putting on this sort of experiment or show. There are some sides to this theory that don't hold up as well. Unlike real experiments, there's no proof he documented the results or even had a framework for the research. If it was an experiment, there would be documents, there would be data, and we haven't seen any of that. Just the lack of information we have about the Pricemaster really is what shrouds him in mystery. His antics just as easily could have been the behavior of someone who enjoyed messing with people and not making a serious commentary. He could have just wanted to see how people reacted, wanted to see what people thought of him as this character. And without any writing, interviews, or secondhand confirmation, the social experiment theory risks projecting too much meaning into what may have been just a random performance. So this theory and the last theory really conflict with each other because on one hand, there's not enough evidence to support that it was a performance, but at the same time, there's not enough evidence to say, okay, this guy was really experimenting with these people and collecting data. This is what leads us into more paranormal theories. Over time, the Pricemaster has shifted from being remembered as a strange man in a mask to something closer to a legend. The combination of his concealed identity, bizarre behavior, and the way stories about him are retold online gives the aura of folklore, similar to the Goatman. In the same way that rural communities once whispered about the boogeyman or trickster spirits, Denton gained its own modern equivalent, an enigma who haunted garage sales instead of forest. His legend grows not because we know who he was, but because we don't. When people on Reddit talk about modern tricksters, the figures they name often sound a lot like the Pricemaster. In one r/mythology thread, users brought up characters like Bugs Bunny, Deadpool, the Doctor from Doctor Who, Eric Cartman, and even Andy Kaufman, figures who thrive on bending the rules, mocking seriousness and confusing those around them. Another commenter added that human trickster mortals exist too, with examples like Barney Stinson from How I Met Your Mother, showing how the archetype doesn't have to be supernatural at all. It can live in everyday personalities who thrive on mischief. Another Redditor, especially an r/pagan, tied the trickster archetype to deeper spiritual and psychological themes. Some describe trickster spirits that impersonate deities, testing believers with lessons wrapped in deception. One comment explained that tricksters reject conventionality and social norms and often torment those who are overly earnest, exposing flaws in order to humble or transform them. Others reference global tradition. Coyotes, ravens, snakes often show up as embodiments of tricksters and even biblical deceivers, as proof that nearly every culture has its own version of a trickster. Seen through this lens, the Pricemaster's mask, absurd counter-offers, and vanishing act echo the classic trickster role, disputing order, mocking human greed, and leaving behind a legend bigger than the person himself. Just like the mythic tricksters of folklore, he thrives in the gaps between sense and nonsense. A few reasons why this theory holds up are rooted in the folklore aura that the Pricemaster has. Mask and hidden identities are common markers in folklore and mythology, often symbolizing power and otherworldliness. The Pricemaster costume elevated him beyond an eccentric neighbor that might live down the street from you into a mysterious figure that just pops up. This story is also passed down through word of mouth. Just like campfire tales, his legend has been exaggerated online, retold with new twist, bigger counteroffers, and wilder details. The lack of clear evidence actually fuels the myth. In folklore, trickster figures disrupt order with absurdity and greed, from the coyote and native traditions to Loki and Norse mythology. Some folklorists note that cultures often create mythical beings tied to wealth or excess, the leprechaun with his gold, or goblins hoarding treasure. In that sense, the Pricemaster could be imagined as a modern spirit of commerce, not stealing money but distorting it, obsessed with the absurdity of value. Now, there's plenty of evidence that leads that he wasn't a mythical creature. Unlike the Goatman or other Denton legends, there's no supernatural origin to this story. He was most likely just a local eccentric. He was most likely just a local actor whose mystique snowballed into the myth. Traditional folklore develops over generations. The Pricemaster legend, born in the internet age, is still young and is more of a virtual story than an actual story passed down from generation to generation. Seeing him as a trickster or a greed spirit might be less about who he was and more about how humans love to force chaotic figures into these mythical archetypes. I mean, there's no evidence that he was a trickster or even a spirit. I mean, he acts as if he's one, but there's no EMF spiking or there's no EMF evidence of him being a spirit. There's no issues with the camera, none of it. So I think that it's more likely that people have forced him into this role as a trickster and, morphed him into this rather than him actually being a spirit. So we've covered that there is a chance that it was performative. We've covered that it could have been performance art based off of the absurd nature of the Pricemaster and using the garage sale as a stage. We've covered that it could be a social experiment, testing human behaviors, and how we assign value to items that may seem useless to other people. And we've covered that he could be just a mythical / folklore figure, a modern trickster that has surfaced, or a local boogeyman. The enduring mystery is really what keeps the Pricemaster alive. In fact, the fact that we don't know who he was, or the fact that we didn't know who he was at the time, is what really gave the story its power over the city of Denton. It's that mystery that kept us attached to it and thinking about it. The performative art angle reflects on how art and theater and film plays a role in our daily lives. The social experiment reflects on our relationship to our possessions that we hold dear to us and how we value them. And the folklore angle reflects on our tendency to put oddities and strange happenings into these ghostly and spiritual categories when it really could just be a human just looking to get a laugh out of everybody. The Pricemaster really says more about who we are as a society than who he is, because I think that we as a city, the city of Denton, have projected a meaning onto his actions because that's what we do with mystery. We project our beliefs onto them so that we can make sense of them. So who or what do you think the Pricemaster really was? Was he just messing with people, or was there a deeper lesson in this strange behavior? And why is it that years later we still talk about him? Is it because of what he did, or because of what his story reveals about us as a city and humans? The Pricemaster really is just a reminder that the way we assign value and the stories we tell about it shape the culture of us and the city around us. Next, we'll step back and take a look at that ripple more closely, how the Pricemaster connects to consumer culture, capitalism, and even the way memes and stories spread online. That's where the investigation gets really interesting. So why does a man in a mask at a garage sale matter? To answer that, we need to look beyond the absurdity and into the culture he was playing with. The Pricemaster acts as a mirror to consumer culture. Humans have a deep-rooted obsession with value and possession. It's not just how much does this item cost, but what does this price say about me, about my status? Our reaction to scarcity, rarity, and high prices tells us more about social and psychological dynamics than about utility. The Pricemaster has broader connections to capitalism. Prices aren't neutral, they signal status, social hierarchy, prestige, and expectations. The capitalist system doesn't just produce goods, it produces meaning about those goods. Under capitalism, value is socially constructed. Something becomes luxury, cheap, premium, etc. These labels influence our behaviors, our self-esteem, and our identity. In this chapter, we'll see how the Pricemaster forces people to confront what they believe value is, how much they're willing to pay, and what they feel embarrassed or proud to possess or offer. The Pricemaster exposed consumer behavior using this by giving his customers a chance to buy secondhand. In the early 2000s, there was a rise of secondhand culture and the idea of owning collector items or vintage items. And this was also almost pre-internet. As a hybrid of a prankster, performance artist, social experimenter, or cultural critic, his actions such as setting weird prices, masking his identity, making offers that test what the consumers were assuming prices would be, are less about trade and more about revealing truths behind their actions. this absurdity reveals real human behavior from the subjects that were a part of this unknowingly. Their willingness to overpay. People sometimes accepted the higher prices, but they would joke and say that, oh, will you take a check for that? Knowing that the check would bounce. There was a lot of cognitive dissonance from the subjects of this experiment. When someone's logic was bent, they would get upset, or they would just be confused and argue with the Pricemaster. This desire to obtain this object was almost like a game. They wanted to feel that they got something better than others, perhaps. People who were wanting to buy things, they perhaps wanted to get something from this garage sale to say, hey, I got something from the Pricemaster and you didn't. That's why I think so many people tried to argue with him, because these were some items that probably couldn't be found anywhere else, and they had this tie to this odd time and place in Denton history. There are also parallels to theatrical art. There's the exposing of the irrationality of everyday life through jarring and unexpected interventions. There's a lot of evidence that suggests this was a form of guerrilla art, using a public setting like a neighborhood. And it challenged the daily life of the people who lived in that neighborhood. And then there was the social practice art element of it. This performance is art that engages with the community, and it provoked reflection from the community. This specifically used everyday objects that people could find at thrift stores. And I think that really just added to the performance. Some studies into luxury consumption ties in to how individuals value these items, and it influences how much they perceive luxury items are supposed to cost, and how much they are worth, and if they are worthwhile to buy. There's also some research on how a culture of an area affects what people are willing to buy. And I think that this performance really ties into that because, you know, he knew that there could possibly be somebody there who was willing to pay $1,000 for an item just to say, hey, I got this from the Pricemaster. And he knew that his performance and his tie to that item really amped up the value of all of those items. And it showed how some people will go for something like that and other people won't. We as a society, we assign value to things based on our culture and how we were brought up socially and just psychology of humans. Maybe we go and we buy specific brands that we like because we are tethered to that brand. A lot of people, when it comes to bags, they'll get a Louis Vuitton bag or a Birkin, when there are just as good bags at Walmart or Target that are lower priced just for that brand to be slapped on the side of that bag, because that shows that they have some sort of higher status than someone else. And material goods can often carry symbolic meaning beyond just unity. It ties into our identity, our status, our belongings, and how we belong to a group. We as a society, we often have an attachment of meaning beyond just the practical use of an item. People often value something not because they need it, but because it signals something. There's a lot of vintage collectors out there, or if an item is rare, people will specifically go out and buy that specific item so that they own it because it's valuable to them. To me, it may seem really silly to go out and buy a rare collector Funko Pop because I don't collect Funko Pops, but to someone else who collects those things and has an attachment to that thing. And if it's something that's really rare in that category, they want that. The world of technology has created a cultural shift for us as well. Early internet auction culture, such as eBay, has created a new form for bidding wars and collecting rare items. These help seed our current culture for online resale, hype culture, and limited drops. With the rise of memes at the time, this was the perfect chance for the Pricemaster to spread his story. And the value of what the Pricemaster was trying to convey shifts. It was no longer about money for these items, but it was more about the attention that he was getting and the infamy that he created around himself. So the Pricemaster wasn't just a quirky figure. It was a reflection of how we see value, how we react to absurdity, and how culture shapes the way we shop, bid, and judge worth. But the story doesn't end with economics. Because once these encounters hit the internet, the legend took on a life of its own. Next, we'll explore how the Pricemaster became an internet myth, how stories spread, and how memes transform a local oddity into something much bigger than it actually is. How does a masked man at a Denton garage sale become an online legend? Let's talk about how the Pricemaster entered the internet. In the early 2000s, there was a rise of sharing platforms. The internet's structure, forums, YouTube, Reddit, blogs, made it easier for local stories to scale globally. Anecdotes once confined to local gossip in a city could now reach every corner of the earth. Eyewitness stories and user-generated media, such as photos, video clips, first-hand accounts, serve as raw material for the myth. Even when authenticity is uncertain, the aura of "I saw something" adds weight to the story. The fact that the Pricemaster hid his identity was also what created a boost of popularity. When identity is hidden or unrevealable, the mystery grows. Compared to the creator of Bitcoin, I mean, when Bitcoin was created by this random guy, everyone was interested in it because nobody knew who started this. And then there's the transition from the fact that the Pricemaster started as a local oddity and now he's a global curiosity. Local stories often stay local. With the rise of sharing platforms in the early 2000s, it gave the Pricemaster a platform to share his performance on, so it didn't just have to stay local. It transitioned it from just a local oddity to an internet sensation. And, you know, when you see on the internet that someone has seen something strange, you're more likely to click on a video that's just like, "I saw something weird." I think that's what made the Pricemaster so popular, is the fact that it was just a video posted online and someone was like, did you see this? This was in my neighborhood. And everyone just started clicking. And the fact that he was anonymous also added to that. When there's a sense of mystery, more people are willing to click on videos that are shrouded in mystery than a video that they already know everything about. Some experts frame memes not just as a joke, but as a cultural artifact that reflects collective norms, aesthetics, values. Memes are a way for people to share, comment, and exaggerate experiences around them. Each version of a meme or story tends to modify or embellish. For example, fringe communities often act as incubators for new meme forums that later spread into more mainstream places. Memes rely on users doing more than just passively consuming. They rely on people remixing them, parroting them, and adding commentary. Platforms like TikTok especially encourage this imitation and replication. The story of the Pricemaster doesn't just exist. It changes and it morphs over time as people add memes and create memes about it. There have been people who have even created posable action figures of the Pricemaster, or people who have created posters and flyers of him. The story relies on people resharing it and retelling it. The Pricemaster has really relied on collective world building since the beginning. Legends online often become collaborative over time, each retelling through these platforms such as Reddit, Twitter, and blogs adds to the story, and the community as a whole shapes the story. And there's an exaggeration to the Pricemaster. He has some surreal elements that magnify his character, his mask, his extreme prices, his impossible exchanges. These make the story more memorable and shareable over time. Once a surreal detail gets attached, it's repeated, often without verification, because the abnormal makes for a good meme. Though the story of the Pricemaster is shared online, it mimics folklore told by word of mouth. It has been passed from subreddit to subreddit, onto Twitter, onto TikTok, onto YouTube. It's passed from location to location the same way folklore was passed down generations ago. Because so many people can add to this story and contribute to this story, it has diverged significantly, and it still maintains its recognizable core, which is the Pricemaster. So how does digital culture reshape a local legend? Do memes trivialize, or do they preserve folklore? Memes preserve a core narrative while transforming its form and details. They trivialize in the sense of humor, exaggeration, but that also contributes to their staying power. They create community. People comment, share, revise, argue. That creates identity around the legend. Stories of the Pricemaster highlight again the fetish for value, rarity, and status. When someone online quotes a price so absurd, that becomes part of what people talk about in the terms of what are things worth. Online legends become a commentary on consumer culture, even if unintentionally people laugh, judge, debate. I would pay that much, they reflect in their own values. This parallels with viral pranks and challenge culture or performative art online. Many online legends function like pranks or challenges. Someone does something weird, someone records, others imitate. The Pricemaster operates similarly, original act plus retellings/imitations. This myth parallels with challenge culture on TikTok because they both thrive on format exaggeration and shared experiences. The story of the Pricemaster being a meme also connects to consumer culture because in the world of technology, attention is currency. And the more weird something is, the more attention it's gonna get. And the Pricemaster was one of the weirdest things to happen in Denton at the time, so it gained a lot of attention. Authenticity becomes a commodity in the internet world. People debate whether stories are true or embellished. The tension between did it really happen versus good meme is a part of what keeps this legend alive. The legend of the Pricemaster has modern implications, such as the digital myth can influence real perceptions of value and behavior at sales and auctions. The legend of the Pricemaster also reveals something about how we view trust as people. People share and consume on the internet freely, and recently it's less about whether what they're posting is true and more about the shock factor that comes with that video and if it will get a reaction from a certain group. So the Pricemaster is everywhere and nowhere at once. Local oddity, virtual legend, and cultural mirror. From Denton streets to the internet, the story grew, evolved, and continues to influence how we think about value, absurdity, and human behavior. Next, we wrap up the investigation, reflect on what he really means to us today, and start asking, did he know something about value that we don't? So, what have we uncovered about the Pricemaster? At first glance, he was just a man in a mask at a garage sale, throwing out prices that didn't make sense and leaving behind a trail of confusion. But when we look closer, they become much more than that. We've traced the encounters, The early 2000s, Denton Streets, a figure who seemed to walk straight out of a dream or a prank. We dug into the theories. Was he merely an act of performance art? Was he running a social experiment? Or did he slowly transition into something closer to local folklore? We explored how his antics connected to bigger questions about consumer culture, capitalism, and the strange way we assign meaning to objects. And we followed the ripple of his story online, where a local oddity became a meme, a myth, and a piece of digital folklore. Even if we never learn who he really was, the legend of the Pricemaster has shown us something important. Sometimes, the strangest stories reveal the most about themselves. So who was the Pricemaster really? Was he just a man in a costume entertaining himself at the expense of bargain hunters? Or was he someone who saw through the game of consumer culture and found a way to hold up a mirror without ever needing to explain? Did he teach us something about human behavior without saying a single word, just through outrageous prices and silence? Or was his real lesson about mystery itself? That we're still talking about him not because of what he did, but because he never told us why. And why do we talk about him years later? Maybe because the story is funny, maybe because it's unsettling, or maybe because we need figures like him, half real, half mythic, to make sense of the strange rules we live by. Maybe the Pricemaster knew more about what things are worth than we do. Maybe he wasn't just selling knickknacks, maybe he was selling insight. Or maybe just because he was a prankster who enjoyed making people squirm, and maybe that's the point. Because in the end, whether he was a trickster, an artist, or just a guy in a mask, the Pricemaster left us with a legend, a reminder that value isn't fixed, meaning isn't stable, and sometimes the strange encounters stay with us the longest. The Denton Files doesn't stop with the Pricemaster. There's another story waiting in the archives, and this one comes straight from the aisles of a local grocery store. December is coming, but it isn't a holiday special, at least not in the way you'd expect it. It's about Morrison Corn Kits, a company that is shrouded in mystery, and nobody really knows why this building still stands tall over all the trees in Denton. This is Agent Sparky. Keep your eyes open and your curiosity closer. The Denton Files will return.